Chapter 21. Remember, remember. Earl Finlayson, Longleaf Manor, Cornwall. Dear Father, I'm not sure I can explain why I'm doing this, but I imagine it's what you would do if you were here. The first time I met the truth speaker, he told me to love goodness more than I fear evil. I kept thinking I heard that advice somewhere before. It's just now dawned on me. I had never heard it before. But every day of my life, I had seen it in a father who always made sure his sons remembered what sort of God we serve. I trust I shall see you again. Your devoted son, Aiden. On the day of the combat, at the appointed time of midday, the two armies arrayed themselves along either side or either edge of the valley that separated their two camps. Normally a peaceful little vale, now the place bristled with thousands of spears and pikes, swords and battle axes. On the eastern rim, the Cornwallers' uniforms formed a wall of blue and gold. Their faces were pale and sickly, their eyes darted to and fro. They believed themselves to be on the brink of defeat and enslavement. On the western edge of the valley, the grim Perthans, in their black armor and spiked helmets, formed a black sea ready to surge over the little valley and the kingdom beyond. On the valley floor placed Grydal, the Perthans' iron champion. His eyes burned with pent-up rage. He was a killing machine, and yet he had spent more than 2 weeks on a battle plain, with no release for his murderous impulses. Now Cornwall, their champion, had yet presented himself. Grydal's bloodlust grew as he imagined the destruction he would unleash on the cowards of Cornwall should they fail to deliver a champion. He abruptly stopped his pacing, though, when he saw a boy, unarmed and dressed in the homespun tunic of a country boy, scrambling down the eastern wall of the valley. A murmur of speculation arose from the Perthan side. Was this the armor bearer of the Cornwall champion? He wasn't bearing any armor. Was he a messenger boy bringing a message from the champion of Cornwall to the champion of Perth? He did have a side pouch like a messenger boy, but this boy wasn't wearing the hat that messengers usually wore. The Perthans, and Grydal especially, watched the boy as he loped toward the middle of the valley floor. A few late wildflowers were blooming in the valley. The midday heat had long since overwhelmed the cool of morning. When he had closed half the distance to the Perthan, Aiden knelt. He needed sling stones, and he selected 5 flat, well-balanced ones that had been rubbed smooth by years of flowing water when the river still ran here. Grydal turned toward the Perthan behind him. "Look!" he boomed, pointing at the kneeling form of a boy at the brook. "The boy is praying! Ha! He'd better pray!" He turned to the Cornwalders. "You had all better pray!" He laughed at the Cornwalders, and the Perthans laughed too, bowing and waving their hands in mock prayers. Aiden placed the 5 smooth stones in his side pouch, where he kept his sling. When he rose and walked with slow, sure steps towards Grydal, his gaze was steady, his face a picture of pure calm. The Perthan was confused and a little agitated by the boy's actions. He was still waiting for a mighty man of Cornwall to appear. "Who are you, boy?" he snarled. "Where is the champion of Cornwall?" "The champion of Cornwall is here already," answered Aiden. "You stand before him now." Grydal looked at Aiden with some annoyance. "You are no champion. You aren't even a man." He looked scornfully at Aiden's skinny frame. "You're hardly even a boy. Look at you. You're a stick." Undaunted by Grydal's scorn, Aiden met his gaze. The Perthan was furious. He raised his spear and pointed at King Darrow, who watched the scene from the edge of the valley. "Am I a dog," he roared, "that you should come at me with a stick?" He was shaking with rage. "Send a champion to face me!" Cornwall has a champion, said Aidan firmly. He is the one God. The one God? Great Owl mocked. He laughed cruelly and pointed his spear at Aidan. Could the one God do no better than you? Aidan stood with his hands on his hips, his feet apart. The one God can deliver me, but even if he doesn't deliver me, I still won't bow down to you or any other person. Bridal laughed again. He looked past Aidan to the Cornwalders on the valley's edge. I see no God. I hear no God. I feel no God. He raised his massive spear in his gigantic hand. It seemed no bigger than a shepherd's staff. But this is real. 25 pounds of ashwood and iron. What do you suppose your one God can do about this? With a quickness that seemed impossible for such a huge man, the Persian hurled the spear at Aidan the way a normal man would toss a dart. A cheer erupted from the Persian side of the valley as the massive spear careered toward the shepherd boy. Gridal's aim was sure. He could hardly miss his target at such close range, nor could anyone hope to dodge a spear thrown with such suddenness and velocity. Aidan didn't flinch. The iron spearhead, heavier than his own head, heavy enough to spill his life in an instant, whistled past, only inches from his ear. The spear stuck in the clay 10 paces behind him, its ashwood shaft still quivering from the force of Gridal's mighty heave. The Persians' cheer died on their lips. On the Cornwalder side, terror gave way to relief, but hope was still far away. Aidan smiled an unworried little smile at the enraged Persian. Are ashwood and iron more real than the living God? Who buried the iron in the ribs of the earth? Who makes the ashwood grow upon the hill? Aidan reached in his side pouch for his sling and one of the smooth stones he had picked up. He swung the sling stone over his head with a free looping motion, as if he were slinging at targets in the bottom pasture. And the one God, Aidan continued, has given you into my hands. Aidan's nonchalance was too much for Gridal to bear. He reached for his battle axe, a ridiculously large and heavy iron thing, as wide across as Aidan's shoulders. Raising the axe above his head, he bellowed like a bull in its fury, then charged Aidan with all the speed his iron armor and lumbering size would allow. The lazy loops of Aidan's sling tightened into whipping circles as the champion of Perth bore down. The earth shook with each ironclad footfall, but Aidan stood firm and waited for Gridal to bring himself into range. The stone whizzed in a circle around Aidan's head, and the roaring Persian came on. He was determined to split Aidan in two, the way a farmer splits a log. He got so close to Aidan that Aidan could see the curling hairs in Gridal's nose. Aidan could almost feel the stinking heat of the great warrior's breath. The looming Persian filled Aidan's frame of vision, making a target so large that Aidan could hardly miss him. At last, the shepherd boy let fly. Gridal was reaching back with his battle axe, poised to deliver an obliterating blow to the insolent little Cornwalder, when the stone struck him. Embedding in his forehead, the flat stone jutted out over his one black eyebrow like a little shelf. He staggered back 1 step, forward 2 steps, then back another step. His eyelids fluttered, his arms went limp, and the axe fell with a heavy thud behind him. He crumpled down on himself, and with a crash, like a dozen iron kettles dropped from a rooftop, he fell forward, his head at Aidan's feet. But Aidan's work wasn't done. Gridal was senseless, not dead. With both hands, Aidan laid hold of the battle axe and dragged it in the 7 feet from the great Persian's feet to his head. The axe weighed nearly as much as Aidan did, and he prayed he would be able to heft it before Gridal came to his senses. He had never wielded a battle axe before, but he had driven many a post with a heavy iron sledge. The practice served him well. He squared his feet to Gridal's fallen form, centering on the patch of bare neck left unprotected by the skewed helmet. With a groaning effort, he raised the axe, staggering under its massive weight. The axe hung in the air. Here was the future of Cornwall. 50 pounds of iron bounced precariously over the head of a shepherd boy. Would it fall backward, toppling the boy and the kingdom with it? Or would it fall forward to end the terror that had so enslaved the imaginations of Cornwall's fighting men? Aidan struggled to balance the axe, which was now seemed determined not to strike a blow against its Perthan master. Gridal's huge fingers began to move, then his arms. He was trying to raise himself. Seeing his enemy stir, Aidan summoned his last reserves of strength. As he tipped the axe forward, he made the valley echo with a shout such as no Perthan and very few Cornwallers had ever heard before. Howie! Gridal was just beginning to regain consciousness. He groggily turned his head toward the shepherd boy's shout. The last thing he ever saw was his own battle axe plunging down on him like a thunderstroke. The Perthans on the west bank stood in shocked silence. They never thought they would see their champion slain. The Cornwalders were silent, too, but only for a moment. They quickly erupted in wild whoops and shouts and hoots of joy and relief. Turning to face his countrymen, Aidan lifted Gridal's helmet in salute to the fighting men of Cornwall. The Cornwalders cheered all the more. Then they grew quiet again when it became clear that their young champion had something to say to them. Aidan's victory speech was short, only 2 words, as a matter of fact, but those 2 words echoed across the whole of Bonifay Plain and throughout all of Cornwalder history. Remember! Remember! The Cornwalders did remember. They remembered the one God who had delivered them from the Perthans so many times before, who was even now delivering them. They remembered what it meant to be Cornwalders, free and true. They remembered that they were brave men and mighty warriors. They remembered why the great empire so hated the free Cornwalders. Gridal, while he lived, had been like a heavy fog descended on the Cornwalders. When they looked about them, they couldn't see the world as it was, only the fog. But now Gridal was dead, and it was as if the fog had been burned away by the bright light of the day. The Cornwalders could see again, and the world they saw was even more beautiful than they had remembered. They, and not the Perthans, were the masters of their island kingdom. According to the terms of Gridal's challenge, and thanks to the bravery of a shepherd boy and the providence of the one God, the invaders were now their slaves. Aidan surveyed his countrymen. They weren't the same men he had seen only an hour before. Gone were the hangdog looks and the sour faces of defeated men. They stood straighter now. The glint of the sun on their weapons was now matched by a glint of confidence in the warriors' eyes. They looked like Cornwalders. That's all they needed, thought Aidan, to remember. He remembered the Wilder King chant. He will silence the braggart, ennoble the coward. Watch for the Wilder King.